So, Dan, it would be very premature to put any estimates of how long time on an operation of this magnitude. There are several 100,000 Russian troops dug in and prepared positions all along the front line. And Ukraine has begun their attack, and they are making steady progress. This is a very difficult fight. It is a very violent fight. And it will likely take a considerable amount of time and at high cost. But at the end of the day, as Napoleon once said, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. And the Ukrainian morale, their leadership, their skill, their tenacity, their resilience is very high. The Russians, on the other hand, their leadership is not necessarily coherent. Their troops' morale is not high. They've been sitting in defensive positions. Many of them don't even know why they're there. So we'll see. It's too early to tell, but we'll see how this plays out.
This is my video update from Nicosia, Cyprus on this Friday morning. And right now I am at the Panaya Phaneromeni Church in Old Town Nicosia. This church is the heart of Old Town Nicosia. So let's talk about what is going on in the world today, this June 16th. And we are going to start things off with a kind of clown world. And it is coming from the BBC, an article that they posted a couple of days ago. I think they posted this on June 14th. And it has the title, Valery Zaluzhny, the man behind Ukraine's counteroffensive. Now, this article, published on June 14th, talks about how awesome Commander Zaluzhny is. And it talks about how he is the mastermind behind Ukraine's military strategy. It talks about how he is the one that is leading this counteroffensive that is taking place right now. It talks about what an awesome relationship he has with Zelensky. And it's just an article that paints Zaluzhny as a military genius, a man of legendary stature. It actually says in the article that in Ukraine, they say that when Commander Zaluzhny enters a dark room, he doesn't need to turn on the light. He shuts down the darkness when he walks in a room. I mean, the guy's like mythical status, right? That is what the BBC article is reporting. It mentions zero about the fact that the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Politico, and a whole bunch of other U.S. mainstream media outlets have claimed that he is the person behind the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. It doesn't mention any of that. This was published on June 14th. So this article from the BBC was published well past the articles from the WAPO, New York Times, Politico, Wall Street Journal that make the claim that Zaluzhny blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. But the BBC fails to mention any of those articles and those claims, which is very odd. And then you get to the end of this article. We're talking the very, very last line. And this is what the BBC says. The BBC asked General Zaluzhny for an interview. He declined our request. Now, Zaluzhny, he gave interviews. He enjoyed giving interviews. I think he's actually given a few interviews to the BBC. And I know he's given interviews to Politico. So he wasn't the type of commander who was like, I don't give interviews. I'm focused on the job that I have in front of me, and I don't have time for interviews. No, that wasn't Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny was more than happy to give interviews, especially to Collective West media. But in this instance, the BBC writes a glowing article about Zaluzhny. And when they contact him for some sort of comment, nothing. Very, very interesting. And it is the absolute last sentence in this BBC article, all the way at the bottom. The BBC asked General Zaluzhny for an interview. He declined our request. Is the BBC saying that they actually got in touch with Zaluzhny or Zaluzhny's office? He declined our request. The BBC calls up Zaluzhny's office, and they say, General Zaluzhny, Commander Zaluzhny, we've written an article about you, and it paints you in an extremely favorable light. Can you give us a comment? No, I don't want to give you a comment. I don't think that's what happened. Anyway, that is the article from the BBC. What is going on here? I don't know, but I will take a guess. And I will say that what you are seeing here is a type of struggle between the forces that want to see Zaluzhny gone, that want to see Nord Stream pinned on Zaluzhny, and there are the forces, in this instance, the BBC. So you would say the BBC is the UK deep state. Those are the forces that, for some reason, they want to keep Zaluzhny in the scene, whether he really is able to be in the scene, whether he's capable of sticking around. I think that's a whole different video, and we've talked about this at great lengths as to the physical condition of Zaluzhny. Who knows in what state he's in physically, but the mythos of Zaluzhny, there are parts of the collective West that want to keep this mythos alive, and there are parts of the collective West that would like to see this man, this mythos of Zaluzhny, they would like to see him blamed for Nord Stream. So that is my opinion as to what is going on. Let's now talk about Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson, he came out with episode 4 with the title Wannabe Dictator. And this was Tucker's best video yet. He's come out with 4 episodes. This one was the best one. And he opens the video up with a Fox News segment, his former employer and now the company that is trying to silence him. And in this Fox video segment, they had Biden speaking on one side and they had Trump speaking on the other. It was a split screen. And on the bottom lower third, they had the statement, the words, wannabe dictator president or wannabe dictator leader of the U.S. I forgot exactly what the chyron said. But Tucker jumped on this and he did a whole monologue on wannabe dictator Biden. And it was spot on. His best episode yet. Just search for it on Twitter. It's trending. Very, very easy to find. And watch it, and you will understand why the permanent state, why Fox News has been ordered to shut Tucker down. An incredible 13 minutes, an incredible 13-minute monologue from Tucker Carlson. I think Tucker is actually better on Twitter than he was on Fox. Much, much better. So that is Tucker's episode number 4, Wannabe Dictator, Joe Bidenopoulos, Greece's favorite son. And now let's turn to the NATO defense minister commanders meeting that took place the other day in Germany. And of course, they were talking about the big counteroffensive that is unfolding right now in Ukraine. And there was a whole lot of coping going on. You know that Jerry Lee Lewis song, "A Whole Lot of Shaking Going On"? Well, what was taking place in Germany amongst the defense ministers of the collective West and the military commanders of the collective West was a whole lot of coping going on. We're talking a whole lot of coping going on, and the narrative has now shifted. The narrative has changed. This counteroffensive is no longer this sprint to the Sea of Azov. Remember when they were telling us that this was going to be a 3 to 5 day Ukraine military sprint to the Sea of Azov, and it would split up the Russian forces and sever the land bridge, and then they would start attacking Crimea relentlessly until Putin surrendered, until Putin capitulated. That was what they were telling us for the last 3 months. Well, that narrative has changed. And now, according to Milley and to Austin, this is now a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon, and it is going to take time. But according to Milley, Ukraine will definitely win, because Milley said in his statement that Ukraine's morale is much better than the Russian military morale. Actually, Milley said that the Russian soldiers that are holding defensive positions, most of them don't even know why they're there. That is actually what Milley said. The Russian soldiers who are in the defensive lines, in these defensive fortifications that Russia has, these 3 lines of defense, they have no idea what they're doing there. Zero idea, according to Milley. And Ukraine will win because the Ukrainian soldiers' morale is much, much better. Actually, I read a story this morning that Ukraine was looking to launch their offensive once again, another try at the Zaporozhye Orekov direction. And they had to call it off because the soldiers did not want to fight. They didn't want to get sent to to certain annihilation. I was going to say something else. They didn't want to get sent towards certain annihilation. And so they said, no, we're not going to move in this direction again, because it's certain death. And I can't confirm this 100%, but that's what's making the rounds on multiple Ukraine, Russian military Telegram and Twitter accounts and channels. The Ukraine soldiers are like, nope, we're not going to go in this Zaporozhye direction again, because we saw what happened the first time around. So I don't know if the Russian soldiers' morale is bad, but if what is making the rounds this morning about Ukrainian soldiers refusing to move on Zaporozhye, if that is indeed true, well, then I would say that is a pretty clear indication that the morale in the Ukraine military is pretty bad, Mark Milley. Anyway, Milley also said that the collective West, they have trained 60,000 Ukrainians for this counteroffensive. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense, Milley said they're also training another 6,000. So they've already trained 60,000, and they're currently training another 6,000. And these troops, these 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers, are absolutely 100% prepared and ready for this marathon, not a sprint, this marathon counteroffensive. The Russian Ministry of Defense, just 2 days ago, they put out a statement saying that from June 4th until June 14th, in 10 days, the Ukraine military losses amounted to 7,500. So if you believe the statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense, I don't see why you wouldn't believe the statement, given all the photos and video imagery that we've seen from the first phase, the first wave of this attack, of this offensive. If you're to believe those numbers, then 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers trained up For this offensive, 7,500, according to the Russian MOD, have been lost. That is 12.5% already gone in the first wave of this counteroffensive attack. Milley and Austin, in their statement, they said that they expected huge Ukraine military losses. It was 100% expected, according to Milley and Austin. That is 12.5%. And the Ukraine military has still not reached the first line of Russian fortifications. That is not a good sign if you're the Ukraine military, if you're Zelensky, if you're Austin, Milley. But Austin, he's trying to paint a positive, optimistic picture of what is happening. He actually told the media at this press conference that all the imagery that is floating around the interwebs is the same photo. It's the same image. I did a video like 3-4 days ago, and I talked about how there's these two images of all of these burnt out Leopards and Bradleys all bunched up together, and how the narrative coming out of the collective West and coming out of the Zelensky regime is that these images is all Russia has. That's all they have to show for their success, is 1 or 2 images that are just being repackaged and reposted a million times. Well, Austin said the same exact thing.
I think the Russians have shown us that same 5 vehicles about 1,000 times from 10 different angles. But quite frankly, the Ukrainians still have a lot of combat capability, combat power.
An unbelievable statement from the U.S. Secretary of Defense. I saw just yesterday more images of the Russian military, Russian helicopters, Russian Lancet drones taking out Bradleys, these the French tanks, Leopards. I mean, what are these guys talking about? There are dozens and dozens of videos and images and photos of the catastrophe that is this Ukraine counteroffensive. A whole lot of coping going on. So Zelensky, he was speaking to the Parliament of Switzerland yesterday, and what was Zelensky asking for? Tanks and weapons. Now, if Ukraine wasn't losing Leopards and these French wheeled tanks and Bradleys, well, then why would Zelensky be begging the Parliament of Switzerland to hand over tanks to Ukraine? If things were going so well for Ukraine, why is Zelensky now making appearances in parliaments in Europe asking for weapons and for tanks? The interesting part about Zelensky's speech to the Swiss parliament is that, according to media sources in Switzerland, and we also have photo and video images of this, the Swiss parliament, or a third of the Swiss parliament, they walked out. They didn't want to hear from Zelensky. Actually, the number one party in the Swiss parliament, from what I understand, the People's Party, they just were a no-show. They didn't want to hear Zelensky begging for Leopard tanks, begging Switzerland to hand over Leopard tanks. Zelensky told the Swiss parliament, "I know that Switzerland is discussing the issue of exporting weapons for the protection and defense of Ukraine. It would be vital. We need weapons so that we can restore peace in Ukraine." Switzerland did decide to sell Germany 25 decommissioned Leopard 2A4 tanks, and then Germany is going to send those Leopards to Ukraine. So these are Switzerland Leopards, which are going to be sold to Germany, which will make them German Leopards, and then Germany's going to sell them or give them to Ukraine, and that would make them Ukrainian Leopards, according to Annalena 360 logic. But the Switzerland is going to sell tanks, decommissioned tanks to Germany, and then Germany's going to give them over to the Zelensky regime. But if these photos, or if the Russians only have one photo, which is just being circulated 1,000,000 times, according to Austin, one photo of destroyed Leopards, 2 Leopards destroyed and 2 or 3 Bradleys destroyed, if that's all that the Russians have for to show for their success, well, then why is Zelensky appearing to a half-empty parliament in Switzerland, begging Switzerland to sell their tanks to Germany so that Germany can then give them to Ukraine? Well, we know that Zelensky is begging the Swiss parliament to sell their tanks to Germany because Russia has destroyed a whole bunch of Ukraine military hardware that the collective West had handed over to Ukraine for this big counteroffensive. And there are rumors actually now that the UK is begging Zelensky not to use the Challenger tanks in the opening stages of this counteroffensive because they understand that the Challenger tanks are going to meet the same fate as the Leopard tanks, and that's going to be bad for business for the UK military industrial complex. Zelensky also gave an interview to NBC News, and he told NBC News that in the event of a successful counteroffensive by the armed forces of Ukraine, Russia will lose this war. And the NBC journalist asked Zelensky, well, how are things going in the opening 2 weeks of this big counteroffensive? And I have to admit, Zelensky did not look very convincing and very confident in his reply. He said that things are going, he's like, it's going good, it's going good. It wasn't a confident reply to this journalist's question. But Israel is also going to hand over tanks, from what I understand, to Ukraine. Actually, I think they're going to sell tanks to Ukraine. They're going to hand Ukraine over the older Merkava tanks. This is what we are hearing now from media in Israel. There are 2 potential countries which are holding advanced negotiations. I am barred from naming them, but one is on the European continent, said Yair Kulas, the head of the Israeli Defense Ministry's Directorate for International Cooperation. This is what he told the media in Israel. So once again, if things are going so well for Ukraine, and if all the images that we're seeing coming out of various social media channels of destroyed Ukraine weapons are actually just one photo recycled 1,000,000 times, why then is Ukraine or are EU countries having to beg Israel to sell them tanks as well? We know the answers to these questions. But Podolyak, Zelensky's BFF, he was speaking to, I believe, to Ukraine media, and well, his narrative is really interesting. According to Podolyak, what we are seeing now is actually not a big counteroffensive. It's not the big counteroffensive. That one is coming. The big counteroffensive is on the way. But Podolyak said in a statement that what we are seeing are actually is actually probing operations, probing activity. That's what we've seen in the first 2 weeks. It's just probing. This is not the counteroffensive. This is not the big offensive. This is not the big attack. Not even close to the big attack, according to Podolyak. Podolyak said the big attack, the big counteroffensive is coming, and he said that Kiev intends to kill as many Russians as possible in the big attack. Peskov actually mocked Podolyak, and he was like, "What are you talking about? It looks like that you're just projecting, Podolyak, because in the first 2 weeks, the only thing that has happened is that Ukraine has suffered catastrophic losses in these probing activities." So Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, was actually mocking Podolyak and his statement. But according to Podolyak, what we are seeing Just probing activities, everybody. Actually, I would say that what we're seeing are pre-probing activities. No, pre-probing activities. These are the probing activities before the pre-probing activities, before the probing activities, before the big counteroffensive. That's what we're seeing now in these first 2 weeks. And the big offensive is going to happen later on, because according to Milley and Austin, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Forget about General Petraeus and we're going to sever the land bridge in 3 days, and Austin saying that the Ukraine military is just going to make a quick sprint, a quick dash to the Sea of Azov as Russian troops retreat, and the Putin government crumbles. Forget about all those statements that we heard for the past 2-3 months. The narrative has changed, everybody. What we're seeing now is a probing operation, and this is all about a marathon, a long-term marathon operation that is taking place. The narrative has completely changed. It's shifted. And in the Czech Republic, we have the Czech president, Petr Pavel, saying that Russians living in the West should be closely monitored by security services as this big counteroffensive continues to unfold. President Petr Pavel, he argued that countries in the collective West should keep a close eye on Russian citizens in the West. And he said this should be something akin to the treatment of ethnic Japanese by the US during World War II. That was actually the example that he cited as he was making the argument to monitor Russians living in the collective West. Pavel made his case in an interview with the US government-funded outlet Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, on Thursday. Quote, "When there is an ongoing war, the security measures related to Russian nationals should be stricter than in normal times," he said. "All Russians living in Western countries should be monitored much more than in the past." The Czech leader drew a comparison to the treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II, which he described as a strict monitoring regime and scrutiny of security services. "That's simply the cost of war," Pavel declared. These people are crazy. These people are crazy. And keep in mind, whatever they're saying they're going to do to Russians, say Russians living in the West, is what they're going to do to their citizens after this war ends. When this war concludes, and it will conclude, everything that they're directing towards Russians, whether it's stuff like what Pavel is saying, monitoring Russians living in the West, whether it's seizing assets, freezing assets, censorship, banning travel, everything that they've done to Russia and to Russians is just going to be directed inwards. Always keep that in mind. Tucker Carlson, the wannabe dictator. So what is the real picture of what is happening in this conflict? Well, I'm going to say that the real picture is that Russia has won. I'm just going to say it. Russia has won. Now it may take 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years for everything to wind down, but the Russian economy, and Alexander did a great video on this yesterday, the Russian economy is set for 2% growth. On the low side, we could be looking at 0.5% growth. but most likely the Russian economy in 2023, 2024, we're looking at 2% growth. I'm reading stories about how Russian businesses are now manufacturing their own textiles. They're making their own clothes now. And all the shops that the collective West, that they left behind in Russia, let's just say, I'll pick a shop, let's say Zara or H&M. I don't know, I'm just picking some clothing outlets. All of these businesses that left Russia, these retail businesses, well, they're going to be Russian clothing manufacturers and clothing chains. And that's just one example of the Russian economy just really kicking it into high gear. So the collective West economies are in recession. The EU is in recession. Germany is in recession. The US will soon be in recession. Ukraine is a failed state. As Putin said, it's a regime, not a country. And the Russian economy is set for 2% growth. And you tell me who's won this thing. That is the only statistic you need to know. I don't want to say the only, but that's the most important statistic you need to know. The St. Petersburg Forum is taking place. The International Economic Forum 2023, and it's a huge success. I think something like 16,000 delegates from 130 countries are attending the SPIEF 2023. All kinds of deals are being signed. Just a huge success. So much for isolated Russia. Should we go in for a sec? Let's go in. Let's go in just for a few seconds. Here we go. All right. Let's continue walking here. So yeah, we can walk this way. So Ursula von der Crazy, she's touring Latin America. She is visiting, or she has visited. I'm not sure where she is at the moment, which country she's at the moment. She was in Chile on Wednesday, Brazil, I believe she was there on Monday. I think she's either in Argentina or on her way to Argentina. And she's also going to go to Mexico. And the reason for her trip to Latin America is because the EU needs friends. I can't put it more simply than that. The EU has ignored Latin America for decades, right? They couldn't care about Latin America. But now they're traveling Latin America because they need friends. And they need cooperation and trade and business because they sanctioned their most important trade partner 10 times, soon to be 11 times. And the EU is hurting. And so Ursula is running to Latin America and begging countries in Latin America to please, please, pretty please, trade with us. because the EU economy is in tatters, I tell you. And she's begging Brazil, she's begging Chile, she's begging Argentina, and I think soon she's going to be begging Mexico. Maybe she's already been to Mexico. I don't know what her itinerary is, but she's trying to tie up the Mercosur trade agreement that that the EU once upon a time put together with Latin America. And when I mean once upon a time, I'm talking 2 decades ago. 2 decades ago, they talked about some sort of EU Latin America trade arrangement. And then the EU completely just ignored Latin America. And now, after 2 decades, Ursula is in Latin America begging for cooperation. Let's see what she had to say here. Let me find a quote from Tatters van der Leyen. Let's see, speaking alongside Brazilian President Lula da Silva on Monday, van der Leyen urged all parties to speed up talks. We both believe that it is now the time to conclude the EU-Mercosur agreement, she said. We have the ambition, the two of us, to get it done as soon as possible, at the latest by the end of the year. Euronews, which is EU, I guess I'm looking for another word instead of state. I was going to say EU state media, but the EU is not a state. I can say EU institution media, EU media, let's just EU-sponsored media, Euronews. They said that the European Commission President von der Leyen is currently touring Latin America as she looks to shore up support for the agreement ahead of negotiations at the end of this month. Given the changing geopolitical environment, the EU sees the continent as an increasingly important ally and no longer wants to be seen to be neglecting the region. Yep. Now the EU comes knocking on Latin America's door. So I really hope that Brazil and Chile and Mexico and Argentina, I really hope they extract a whole lot of concessions from the European Union, because the EU's hand at this moment in time is very, very weak. So that's Van der Crazy and her trip to Latin America. And let's finish it off now with a couple of clown worlds. And in this first clown world, we will go back to Zaluzhny. Let's go back to Zaluzhny, and actually let's walk this way. Now, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to film as we walk in this direction, because we are going to be approaching the buffer zone, the green zone, to the occupied north, and usually they prohibit filming. So let's see how close we can get here. So the first clown world is Zaluzhny, and there's a postcard now that is, I don't know, is it being sold? I guess it's being sold. Anyway, in Ukraine, a limited collection of stamps, not a postcard, stamps, was issued with the image of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Zaluzhny, and his autograph. So, what does... Interesting. Cafe, 50s cafe. What does it tell you that they're now issuing an autographed postcard of Zaluzhny? An autographed stamp of Zaluzhny? Is that an indication that all is good with Zaluzhny? Or is that an indication that all is not good? Let me know in the comments down below. What is the message that is sent when you issue a stamp? someone. I don't know. I don't think it's a good sign if you're Zaluzhny when they're selling your autograph stamp. And another clown world. Russia increases dolphins defending Sevastopol from Ukrainian attacks. Oh, that evil Putin, he's weaponized the dolphins. He's weaponized the dolphins, or at least that's what they want to make it seem like. They want to make it seem like Putin is evil and he has dolphins working for him, protecting Crimea. But I thought dolphins were like the good guys. You know, every Hollywood movie. So here's the green zone, the buffer zone right there. So every movie always told us that that dolphins are good. So if the dolphins are mobilizing to protect Crimea and Russia, does that mean that they're protecting the good guys? I don't know. I mean, that's what Hollywood has always told us. Dolphins are protectors. They're the good guys. They're the good guys. So they're protecting Crimea and Sevastopol, according to Collective West Media. Anyway, that's the video, everyone. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, and Telegram. Also on Rockfin. Go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code Good Day. Dishwashers, everyone. Washing machines. Refrigerators. A whole lot of microchips there for the Russians to use. Right, Ursula? A whole lot of microchips there. Take care, everyone.